Historia Canadiana is recorded on the unceded lands of the Kanien'kehá:ka First Nation. Hello, everyone, and welcome to A Cultural History of Canada. My name is Patrick, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Mackenzie. I actually got the
Love
name
how
right
you
this
had to
time.
catch yourself. You had to catch yourself though.
The power of editing will make it so I will never have caught myself.
The power of editing.
Hey, Mac, before we get into the show, guess what?
Chicken butt.
Guess what today is? What this episode is?
It's Lyon Mackenzie King. We said it was going to be this in the last episode.
It is also our 100th episode. Woo!
Let's go, baby. And we're talking about the king.
Heyo, we're talking about part one of The King, what is probably going to be 3 parts, as we mentioned in
One for each decade he was in power.
Pretty much, yeah. We were talking about this last time for people who didn't listen, but basically we decided that because Mackenzie
The man was
King's
in power for so long, and the problem is each decade was a different thing.
yeah.
Like the 20s is its own thing, the 30s is its own thing, the 40s is its own thing.
Yeah.
And you need to deconstruct everything in there because you can't just cover one, like you can't, even a two-part, you can't go from like the Roaring 20s and the Great Depression and World War II in a two-part.
No.
They're all such big, impactful events. This isn't
Exactly.
like we could cover the entirety of the Justin Trudeau prime ministership in like 1 or 2 episodes easily.
Yeah. Yeah.
The only time we would have to take a break is if we wanted to cover like a COVID special.
Sure. Which is basically send $2,000 checks and panic.
Hey, I wasn't complaining when I got that money.
No, me neither. So, but yeah, so that's kind of the plan, as Max said. We're not going to do the episodes back to back. We're probably going to get to part 2 in like 10 or 15 episodes, depending on how long it takes to like get to that point. I don't know.
Because we still want to cover a lot of like the actual content within that, because we don't want to have to then go back and do 50 episodes of like, because again, the 20s and the 30s and the 40s was a big time also, I'm guessing, for literature and culture and the arts.
It sure was. Shockingly, people responded to the Depression in World War II and just life getting weird. Like, who knew?
Who knew?
I've been hesitating about like what books to talk about for the Depression era because there's like so many really good books that talk about that, and I have to choose some. I can't do all of them. So anyway, we'll cross that bridge when we get. So yeah, obviously we're not gonna like rank. We can like maybe tentatively rank him for now, but we're not gonna like give a final ranking until we finish like the 3 parts of Mackenzie King's tenure. So obviously, if people want to hear these shows early, they can sign up on our Patreon for $3 a month or $1 a month. And you can also get access for $3 a month to the extra content that we produce, which is Pop Canada. And the last time we talked about an animated TV show and why it may or may not represent propaganda. That was fun.
That was a good episode talking about Paw Patrol.
Absolutely unhinged. But yeah, it was fun. So consider doing that, or if not, just leave a 5-star review. And yeah, that'll be great. Mac, getting into this episode, I feel like this is probably the prime minister after MacDonald that you probably have some inkling about. Like you've at least heard his name.
I know about Laurier.
That's true. Yeah.
Laurier is the GOAT. Laurier is first in my heart.
Yeah, that's fair. But so what are your perceptions of William Lyon Mackenzie King going into this 3-parter?
Well, so it really goes to show that what you do last will always be remembered the most, because I'm mostly remember him as like the strong prime minister that got us through World War II.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of where my mind is. It's like, oh yeah, that's like what I know him for. And obviously, I'm sure there's a bunch of shit that goes on in the 20s. So I'm sure he's involved with some
listeners who don't know,
economic
I have 5
nonsense.
pages of notes I have
with
5 pages of notes just for the 20s, and I had to
just
edit a lot.
just some more economic nonsense, you know? Like the 20s
Yep.
is when we really tried to be like, oh yeah, let's just capitalism run free, and realize, oh,
Yeah,
capitalism can't run free. And it looks like we're gonna have to learn that lesson in the 20s again.
but that's the thing. It's like it's kind of with Mackenzie King that you start to see. I was making a joke before we were recording that a lot of the issues that we see today kind of started with him. It's not, I'm not saying that necessarily in a critical way. I think he was the first or one of the first to try to do this, right? And I think he was well intended with a lot of these ways, but a lot of the ideas that we see today of trying to balance the free market kind of started with him, right?
Yeah,
Like
it's
he's one of the first to try to do that actively. Yeah.
yeah, and I think it comes as no shocker that me and Patrick are both more left-leaning when it
Hmm.
comes to our economic beliefs. But we do both still believe in the necessity of some competition, in some sort of like the markets do need to be a bit free, and capitalism does have its place. It's just like we have to understand the
Speak for yourself,
consequences
you
of that.
bootlicker.
I'm a bootlicking fascist. I
No, go
am
ahead.
the
Sorry.
1%. No, but I feel like we might come off a certain way in this episode when talking about economic policy, but at the end of the day, I was about to say boot again. We both do recognize like the necessity of both things.
Sure. Yeah.
And Patrick
Especially
is waving his fan like a fucking 19th century Victorian noblewoman right now, so like we have some tendencies in us, okay?
I don't have air conditioning, and for listeners who are not in Montreal, it's 40 degrees today. I'm not even joking. I'm not even exaggerating. It is sweltering.
It's 40 degrees today.
Shut up. I see the air conditioning that you have in your background. Don't
It's not on
start
though.
whatever. You psycho.
I mean, it's kind of we're in winter right now, so it's only like 18 degrees. It's
Yeah,
pretty nice.
exactly. It's winter in Australia. But I wish it were 18
It's
degrees.
winter in Australia.
But yeah, and like all even when we talked because we had a whole episode we were talking about communism in Canada, right? And it's like that only even despite my like left leaning ideas, my left not left leaning, my left ideas. I'm not gonna like sugarcoat that one. Um, like it is foolhardy to assume that like oh Mackenzie King could have been just like purely socialistic because like there are material realities that stopped him from doing that as well. Like
Mhm.
I even if I personally wanted to, it doesn't make sense as a criticism, right? And
Mhm.
I can I think still have a valid conversation about that towards Mackenzie King. Um, anyway, so one of the things that I think is interesting about King, and just to kind of kick us off, is like the thing that people most associate, I think, is exactly what you were saying, the idea that he kind of got us through World War II, right? That's
Mhm.
where most people would have encountered him in school, and that he's weird. Not in the
As
like,
we say about
not
the
in the modern sense.
Republicans these days, he's
Not,
just
I was just about to
weird.
say, not in that sense, not in like the couch banging sense.
Mackenzie King did not fuck a couch,
I hate that that's
but
recorded.
if the Ouija board told him to,
He probably would have
the
because he
man was
was,
also very
yeah,
much into Ouija.
yes, he actively sought out like the supernatural. Speaking to his mother, Ouija boards, like you were saying. He was also an outlier in his own day for being a perpetual bachelor, right? Which obviously did happen in like in the throughout history, bachelors have always existed. But especially in the political realm, in the more conservative setting that Canada has typically run in, as far as politics is concerned, it does tend to be an outlier. So that's kind of, I think, also the image that people have of William Lyon Mackenzie King is just as this guy who tried to speak to the dead and tried to take political advice from his ghost mom. So do with that information what you will.
Hmm.
um, I don't know. I'm not gonna focus. I don't think we have to focus too much on that, right? A lot of that information does come from us. book that tried to show how like conflicted he was as a person, right? This was a book that came out in the 70s, called A Very Double Life, by C.P. Stacey, which I can link in the description if people want. But that's kind of where one of the first books to kind of really emphasize that duality of him being both this very rational figure of wanting to conduct Canada in a particular way, but also someone who firmly believed in ghosts. And that's fascinating.
Like, Mackenzie. Oh my God, Scoob, we're gonna have to work with William Lyon Mackenzie.
But it is kind of, I think we've talked about this on the show before, but like it is interesting in the early 20th century and late 19th century how this duality existed in a lot of people, like Charles Dickens, for example, where the World War, the First World War kind of, and the modern war and modern world kind of very much rationalizes a lot of the world around us, so in good and bad ways. But also people need to believe in the supernatural because of those very same factors. And you see that, I think, in Mackenzie King. Right. I don't know if you have anything to say about that in particular, but I think that it's kind of interesting. Yeah. I think. Are you back?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Probably best to turn off my VPN.
Okay. So anyway, do you know who Mackenzie King's grandparents are? Because that, I think, also informs a little bit of who he is as a character.
Mr. and Mrs. King?
No. So one of them's a Mackenzie and one of them's a King. And yeah, but like Mackenzie in the last name. But so if Mackenzie King was born,
am I also a king? Am I a Mackenzie King?
Yes.
Yay!
Your name is Mackenzie and you're my king. Yes. Yay! But think back, who would have been a famous Mackenzie and a grandfather to someone who would have been born at the end of the 19th century?
Is there like Arthur Mackenzie somewhere there?
Nope, another guy named William Mackenzie, but this one was one of the leaders of the rebellions of 1837 that we cannot escape in Canada.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
So you have that guy, right? William Mackenzie, radical rabble rouser, right? On the one hand, who wants such radical ideas as democracy. And his other granddaddy king is mostly forgotten to history, but he was a soldier on the other side of that very same conflict, fighting for the British.
Oh no! Oh dear me!
Through familial shenanigans and marriage shenanigans, those two branches that were on opposite sides of the conflict just kind of merged into William Lyon Mackenzie King, which again demonstrates, I think, perfectly the duality that man will represent. So the dualities are genetic at that point, and that's awesome. I don't know. I don't know if you had anything to say about that. I just think it's kind of fun. That
I think it really does highlight the fact that you can't get far in this country without being a little bit Quebecois.
So William Mackenzie was actually from Ontario, but yeah, that rabble rousing does kind of
that little rabble, just le petit Québécois rabble rousing.
But you're not wrong. He will learn from the rebellions of 1837, and in the sense of like, yes, we do need Quebec, and that's something that obviously his opponent Arthur Meehan, as we talked about, will not learn. So good on you, Mackenzie King.
So I need this dirty Québécois. I need the fucking Québécois.
So Mackenzie King in his early days, as we kind of talked about in the last episode with Arthur Meehan, would go to school at the University of Toronto and, still and make a name for himself as someone who was a great debater. But unlike his forever foe, Arthur Meehan, he didn't tend to talk down to people. He tended to use language that was very grounded, much more normative, and much more straightforward, right? Which was very good for what he kind of chose as an early career, which was basically a labor conciliator. Right? He was the guy that was hired in the early days of union, like rabble rousing, right? He was the guy
Those
that was
dirty
hired.
unions.
Those damn workers who want rights and shit. So he was the guy who was hired to basically be a go-between, right? Obviously, now you have things like lawyers who are specialized in that, but at the time
Dirty
you could just have
lawyer.
But at the time you could just have a guy on retainer, and that guy was William Lyon Mackenzie King. And so he did gain a reputation very quickly as a kind of conciliator, right? Trying to conciliate big business and the actual benefits that the little person or the worker can derive from that. And this, even though it would be written much later, this would be evidenced in a book that I'll kind of reference throughout the notes that he wrote called Industry and Humanity, which came out in 1918. So just before he became prime minister.
Humanity must give way for industry, for industry is our God and Savior.
That's. Did you read the book? Because that's kind of it.
No, I just took a guess. It's got that invisible hand trickle down je ne sais quoi flavor to it. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah. I mean, again, there is only so much that a person can think outside of. I think as far as like the mentalities of an era are concerned, right? And industry and technological innovation was still very much seen as the advancement of humanity in that sense, right? And the thing that would bring progress, right, to all. Now, where Mackenzie King's more left-leaning ideas came in was to say, okay, well, the average person can benefit from that as well, and we can use the profits of that are generated by industry in order to help humanity. Obviously, it wouldn't quite work out like that in most cases, but he tried, right? And that was kind of his social.
you try your best, but you don't succeed.
Exactly. It's just a young William Lyon Mackenzie King waving his social democratic baton around, being like, hey, trickle down economics.
Get what you want, but watch it you need. Even though all economists today say that trickle down economics doesn't work.
Yeah. But hey, it was the 1910s. We didn't know.
They were all high on cocaine and opium.
Like, obviously,
they're all taking opium for fun.
I am oversimplifying the argument he makes, but that's kind of the gist of it. In this case, it's like a very similar idea to what you see in a lot of like Nordic countries now. But yeah, what's kind of interesting, and I don't think we'll spend too much time on this, but one of the people one of the institutions that Mackenzie King worked for as a conciliator, as a labor conciliator, was the Rockefeller Institution, right?
Oh, no.
Oh, yes.
Oh, no. He worked for the Rockefellers.
So again, in one of the books that I used for my research, kind of puts it very nicely, where Mackenzie King, this person who likes to portray himself as a defender of the working man, right, kind of steps jauntily into another paradox when he starts working for the Rockefellers, right? Would his grandfather have worked for Rockefeller? Has any Rockefeller ever walked around the slums of Chicago? And
no,
right? But
the answer is no
for both. And nevertheless, he's still gonna try to make it work and try to make Rockefeller and his institution kind of more human in that sense. But yeah. Anyway, they paid him $25,000 a year, basically. $20,000 a year.
Great.
Oh yeah, paid him great to kind of appease the unions in this case, because that was basically his job, and it worked.
Those dirty damn unions.
And it worked so well that he was approached by another millionaire, because we weren't talking about billionaires at the time, This one was the
I mean, soon
Carnegies.
we're going to be talking about trillionaires anyway. So
Yeah. So it doesn't matter. It's all a drop in the. It gets to so big that it doesn't matter anymore.
just like us.
So the
Sorry,
Carnegies also eventually offered Mackenzie King a better deal of $25,000 a year, and he would be allowed to live in Canada and start his own political career. So it is kind of interesting that Mackenzie King starts off.
I hear corporate sponsorship, baby.
I was just about to say, like, it's kind of ironic and not too dissimilar to what you see in a lot of political cases, right? At the time and today, but like you do need a secure backing in order to start a career in
money.
Politics. Yeah.
Listen, money speaks more than people do. One of
Exactly.
the biggest things Kamala Harris has going for her right now is that she's got the most financial backing of anybody ever running for presidency.
Exactly. So he would kind of ingratiate himself into the Liberal Party, right, as someone who has fresh ideas and someone who was certainly younger than Laurier, who was getting on in age by this point. And so he would kind of slowly.
Rest now, King.
Yeah, exactly.
King
so
Laurier
he's kind of slowly.
Rest now.
He would slowly ingratiate himself and through actually his labor expertise, right? So he would start to basically push for acts that would make for better labor conditions in Canada, for example. He became, in 1908, the first actually Minister of Labor, which is kind of cool that he was someone who kind of started that off. He would, in 1910, push for what became known as the Combines Investigation Act, right? Which is basically a watered down version of what we have today of like an antitrust law. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, the Combines Act. No.
The Combines Act? Talk to me about it.
It's not like a farming combine. It's actually corporate combination, like mergers. In this case, it's what the combines refer to.
Monopolies and stuff. It does the whole thing of like, hey, we need to allow competition.
Kind of, but it doesn't prevent them. Like this first version, is very like surface level, and it basically says it's not illegal to merge, but we're basically allowing with this act that we can investigate as to maybe if it's a problem. Like that's basically what the act is. It's like we have the power to investigate, but it's not technically illegal for companies to become too big yet, right? So that's, I guess it's a score one for the little guy right there.
I mean, you gotta start somewhere.
Yeah, that's true. So
like and people need to get it through their heads. You're never going to see like a massive sweeping change happen overnight.
No,
that's just not how humans work. We're very dumb that way.
Isn't it?
We go, I want the change, and then the change comes, and we're like, change, and then we go hide under our blankets more.
Because often, and that's what the point of organization serves. Like often, people don't expect the actual like actions to work. Right. And so when they end up with power in their hands, they're like, oh, shit, now I actually have to do something about it. And then it kind of falls apart. But if they know what they're doing, sometimes, as the famous saying goes, a decade can happen in a week. But it's rare. Anyway, so that's kind of like his early career. And in 1919, so about 10 years after he like formally like got into politics proper, right, he would be chosen as Wilfrid Laurier's successor as head of the Liberal Party, right? So very quickly making a name for himself. But what's kind of interesting, and this is where we get our first like cultural element. I don't know if you read the poem that I linked.
I did. It's okay. So good.
So good. This is a poem that was written by F.R. Scott, who is also a politician in his own right, and we've talked about on the show before. So F.R. Scott was one of the Montreal group that we talked about a few episodes back. And this poem, which is just titled W.L.M.K, does kind of demonstrate the party that Wilfrid Laurier would inherit, right? One that was
You're
deeply
listening
divided.
to WLMK on the Liberal News Network. Hey there, listener. You're phoning in. You're on the line.
So, love the show. Thank you very much for hosting it. Who wants to, can someone read the poem for us so that we get a better sense of what the hell we're talking about right now?
All right, here you go. How shall we speak of Canada, Mackenzie King dead? The mother's boy in the lonely room with his dog, his medium, and his ruins. He blunted us, we had no shape, because he never took sides, and no sides, because he never allowed them to take shape. He skillfully avoided what was wrong without saying what was right, and never let his on the one hand know what his on the other hand was doing. The height of his ambition was to pile a parliamentary committee on a royal commission, to have conscription if necessary, but not necessarily conscription, to let Parliament decide, later, postpone, postpone, abstain. Only one thread was certain: after World War I, business as usual; after World War II, orderly decontrol. Always he led us back to where we were before. Thanks for
Okay,
calling in, listener.
thank you. Lovely reading. So, obviously, this poem was written much later, right? At the end of Mackenzie King's career, of his life.
The left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing.
But I chose this poem because of the conscription and the division that he kind of represents here. So as Scott does kind of skillfully show in this poem, Mackenzie King was always trying to do this balancing act, right? And as we've talked about when we did that episode on World War I, or those episodes, conscription was a very divisive issue, and he always had difficulty kind of managing how he felt about that, and how Britain would react versus how Canada as a technically independent country would react. And yes, he wasn't in power at this time when like World War I's conscription was happening, but as head of the party, or almost as an important figure, he does kind of have a lot of say in this, and it would certainly be something that would come to haunt him with conscription in World War II, right? So yeah, that's kind of the reason why I wanted to read this poem, but I don't know if you had anything to add to it as a text.
I think it really, again, it highlights that idea that we were talking about, the lack of change in things, because people, like, that's probably what made Mackenzie so popular, is he just brought things back to the way they were before, and that's what people want. That's what we've seen time and time and again. People want to make it great again.
Yep. Whatever that means.
Yeah, even though that only means great sense for often only like a certain group of people.
Yeah. White middle class dudes.
Not even white middle class dudes.
No. White rich dudes. Often. At least, yeah, in the case of Trump. Anyway. But yeah, so obviously Scott's own politics do kind of shine through in this case. And for those of you who don't remember, who didn't listen to that episode, Scott would be someone who would be very active in left-wing politics. So his criticisms come from that perspective. And he would be instrumental to like what became the NDP. So in 1921, that's when we get Mackenzie King's first win, right? He officially becomes Prime Minister of Canada. And yeah, do you have anything to add about his early life before we get into that?
About Mackenzie King?
Yes.
Let me see if there's anything else. I think that's like the most of it. It really does highlight the importance of succession within political parties, because when a successor is not properly presented, really throw the party into disarray. Because that's what happened with MacDonald, really. MacDonald never really had a successor set up, and then we had four clowns. Laurier positioned a successor with Mackenzie King, and look at the success of it all.
It does
and
kind
we're
of
seeing
show
that
also
in our modern politics today. Trudeau is not positioning a successor. The Liberal Party is falling apart.
Yeah. It is kind of interesting also how that operates in a seemingly democratic system, right? Like the idea of successions. And again, I get it. You want consistency in your party, but the idea that these figures who are ostensibly democratically elected, right, are also chosen years ahead of time, right, for being, you know, who's going to lead the country eventually in some way, shape, or form. Right? So it is kind of interesting to think of it that way. But yeah, it has gotten better recently, I think, with like elections and parties and stuff like that. But it is kind of showing and telling of what the state of politics were at the time, right? Okay, so King, despite like having a reputation as being quite a popular prime minister, his first win and his first term as prime minister was won by kind of a bare majority, and mostly because he managed to court what was basically a protest party, right, which is the Progressive Party as it existed. It no longer exists anymore, but in the West, as we talked about, there was mounting discontent with World War One of how farmers were treated, and so the Progressive Party kind of filled in that gap, right? Allowed the farmers to voice their discontent in Parliament. And King kind of grabbed onto that and managed to get a lot of progressives to back him, and that allowed the Liberal Party to have a majority in the House of Commons. And that would kind of take him into the first half of the 1920s. And as the poem indicates, he would kind of fall halfway between most of the issues that were raised in Parliament, right? Mostly because his majority wasn't that strong, right? A lot of the cases, like, he couldn't like vocalize strong opinions on most things because it risked rocking the boat too much, which kind of makes his first term a little bit boring to talk about in that particular aspect, because he's just like,
nothing happens.
What about not free trade, but what I'll call freer trade? Like some restrictions. Is that exciting for anyone? No.
Oh God.
So like where like major decisions are concerned with Canada, it's not that like at home it's not that major. But what is kind of interesting to talk about with his first term is the fact that he would kind of take a step further into Canada's independence, right? Which is something that he would continue on in 1931, right? When he would make the with the fucking Westminster Treaty, right? But in 1922, there was like a major crisis called the Chanak Crisis. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Chanak. Where basically the British Empire coming out of World War One was like, hey, how about we fight the Turks too, because they're on their dying leg.
And he said no.
Yeah. Basically, he was like, I don't feel like it. Our country limped out of World War One, and we're not fully recovered yet, despite it being 4 years later. Get fucked, Great Britain.
What are you gonna do? Like,
yeah, that's pretty much what he did. I'm glossing over.
Like, we live on the other side of the world, idiots. What are you gonna do?
And what was kind of funny, at least with this, is that it is kind of indicative of how little power Britain was starting to have over the Commonwealth, because King found out that the British were asking for help from the Commonwealth through the newspapers. He didn't even find out through official channels or anything like that. Like, the newspapers taught him this news, and he was like, oh, I guess I may be going to war? That sucks. How about I don't?
And he was like, nobody formally asked me to go to war, so like, get fucked.
That's exactly.
If you never ask, I never have to answer. Aha.
Yeah. He did actually formally answer, but he very diplomatically called the conflict a European war, and so that meant de facto that Canada was not involved in it. And nearly gave.
What is Britain gonna do? Like, I'm sorry, but like, oh, trade sanction impositions, you're in the 20s. You're in the fucking roaring 20s of the economy. And Canada's gonna be doing more trade with America anyway. Who cares?
It already started to do much more trade with America. So
Yeah.
sorry,
And
dude,
really, this just
but
sets the trade for the Windsor Act in 19. Was it 31 or
the
33?
Westminster. Yeah. Yeah,
Westminster.
31. Yeah.
I got both those things wrong.
It's fine.
And the
But yeah,
spirit is there.
the spirit is there, and it is kind of funny because again, it does show. I like at the time, the colonial secretary was a certain man who you've probably never heard of, but his name was Winston Churchill, and he was in charge of kind of managing
He
the
sounds
fact
like
that
he
the
gets drunk
Commonwealth.
a lot.
Yeah, he sounds like he his name makes it sound like he looks like a pit bull. I don't know if that makes sense. Um, but anyway, he would be very incensed about the fact that Canada would not participate in this. It blew his mind, and he basically
Blew
couldn't
his
get
mind
used
that
to a
Canada
20th
said
century.
no.
Yeah, exactly. He was like, "What is this world that we're coming to, where God is dead and Britain can't control its colonies anymore?"
Honestly, it makes like, what was it, the 8 hours that Canada didn't respond to the World War II? It makes it even
Exactly.
funnier because that's King and Churchill again. And that's literally King
Pretty
looking
much.
across at Churchill and going, hey, want to see me do it again?
I did it once, asshole. I'll do it as many times as you need to understand.
That's such a big dick energy.
But it is.
Like, I'm sorry, but that's one of my things I'm most proud about with Canada. We waited those 8 hours just to be like, wait for it. Yeah, now we're joining World War
So, but
II. It's
it
kind
is
of
kind of
petty
fast.
bullshit I live for.
It's so petty. It's so good. I love it so much. But it is kind of fascinating that he would be on the fence about so many things at home, and then this he'd be like, "No, get fucked." Right? And it does
Well, again, it's
show where
because
Canada is at that moment. Yeah.
in at let's be honest, at this point, there's not a lot of British sympathizers left.
Right.
The Canadian population, more than anything, wants somebody who's for Canada. And being
Yeah.
against Britain is so easy to be for Canada. It's like if you were in the running for politics in the modern day, the worst thing you could do is try and be American.
Exactly. Yeah.
Canadian politics in the modern day, the worst thing you can do is try and be American.
Yeah.
And it's
So,
it's the one way any Canadian politician can win is by attacking America.
mhm. And he knew
Except if you're in
that.
Alberta.
Yeah. I mean, Wexit's kind of died down, but yeah. Ugh.
Mm,
Um, I know that. I mean, that was one of the ways that he won over his opponent, right, Arthur Meehan, because Meehan was such an Anglophile, right, that people were like, "No, that's absurd. Why would I want to do that?" Right? I've tasted freedom. I've fought for my own country. No.
mm.
Um, so yeah, I think King is a savvy politician in that sense, where he noticed where his votes came from in
Yeah.
1921. It was like, okay,
Well,
this I can firmly stand on. Yeah.
the man is peak liberal insofar that he doesn't actually say anything. And that's basically
Exactly.
what it means to be a member of the Liberal Party.
Such a, be the ultimate centrist, extreme center, as my dad calls himself.
Yeah. Just like so even keeled that nothing rocks the boat.
Yeah.
Which again, pros
Yep.
and cons.
Sure. Yep. I love it.
I can see the burning hatred in your eyes.
But it's the thing that we were talking about with movies. It's like when you're just nothing, what do you want me to say to
That's
that?
true.
Like,
That's true. Movie and politicians are famously the same.
yes, it's exactly that. I'm gonna stake my life on that one. That's the hill I'm going to die on.
Yeah. No, but you're right. Like it's fascinating to see. But then he would become the guy that led us through World War II,
Yes,
which
because I
isn't
think
nothing.
it's not nothing. I think he works well in a crisis. Like we'll
Yeah.
see that. I think we'll see that as we keep going. I think he's able to make firm decisions, but when he's pressured to do so, when he doesn't
Yeah.
have to, that's when it becomes dicey. which is like ultimate Canadian right there.
Oh, 100%. That's Canada in a nutshell. Like all the pressure we had to put just to legalize weed, man.
Oh my God. So basically, in complementing what you just said, there seems to have been, like, by 1922, after the crisis, it seems like the post-war slump was over, right? The roaring 20s, as you were saying. And of course, Mackenzie King in his infinite wisdom was like, let me, like, say that it's because of my 4 university degrees and my experience with the US economy that is why things are going so well right now. And my
People tell
solution to
me,
it,
they come to me, they go, King, you've got the best degrees of anybody I've ever seen. You've got the most degrees. I've got 4 degrees. Does Mean have 4 degrees? No, because he's a fucking loser.
he's a mathematician, he's a big nerd.
He's a mathematician. He's a loser. Big loser. Biggest loser. Me, I've got 4 degrees. Kind of
I
one,
don't
two,
know
three,
how,
four.
I don't know how I feel about this this conflation. Oh no. It does give off a similar energy.
I'm gonna make Canada the biggest. Our economy is gonna be huge, totally huge. And does King George? He's not telling me what to do. He can't tell me what to do. He's not doing anything to tell me what to do. I'm telling him. I go to him and I say, King George, no, because he's a fucking loser.
Do you know what? Do you know what your impression of Trump makes you sound like? It's a mix of George Takei and William Shatner. And
Have you seen
it's
George
so
Takei
bad.
writing as Donald Trump on Facebook? It's so
Yes,
funny.
it's so funny. It's great.
I go to King George and I tell him, no, I'm not fighting in your fucking war, George, and he doesn't do anything because he's a fucking loser. I
So
just want to fucking punch him. Just want to punch the guy.
so because everything was going so well, what was the solution? Just let the
He was
good
making
times
Canada great
roll,
again.
baby. Yeah, I'm just gonna let it go. If it's going well, I'm not gonna touch it. That's how the free market works, baby. Um, so go ahead.
Listen, we have to let the markets work themselves. We've got the best markets, just the best.
So letting the good times roll, that was the solution because clearly
That was
nothing.
everybody's solution in the
Yeah,
20s.
not that nothing's gonna go
Everybody was
wrong.
so hopped up on cocaine and illegal alcohol.
Yeah, we'll get to the illegal alcohol part. That's gonna
Just
have a major
moonshine
impact.
everywhere.
So just letting the good times roll, nothing's gonna happen. It's just gonna be up, up, up forever if we just let it happen. That's how the economy works, and that's what's gonna happen forever, right? And it's all thanks to me. And you know what? Since we're rolling in money right now, let's invite a bunch of immigrants, right? And be sure to tell them that it's because of the Liberal Party that they're able to
I
make such a
love
fortune in
immigrants.
Canada.
Immigrants
He
are
did.
my best friends. We're gonna
He
have the
did.
most immigrants of any country, and they're gonna be the best immigrants.
He genuinely did love immigrants, right? In this case, he welcomed a lot of them in, mostly Eastern European immigrants, obviously,
Well, it
because,
sounds like
you know,
more than anything, like internal policy, he didn't say anything, but he had a
yeah.
lot of foreign policy.
Yes, exactly. That's what I was kind of building to. But yeah, you're absolutely right in this case.
His foreign policy was on,
Yeah. But again,
which is
he
again
didn't
what you
have.
want for your crisis and wartime prime minister. You want a foreign policy expert. You want somebody who can like do things like stand up to the British bulldog and tell him to get fucked.
Exactly. And it's kind of interesting that it kind of makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
why would you rock the boat if it goes well? And people hadn't rarely, like, yes, economic slumps had happened, but it's because of the war. Like,
Yeah.
if things technically, like the way people were seeing it at the time, is like, if things go well, why would I do anything? Like, the logic was there. Obviously, we know now that that's bullshit, but we had never lived through the Great Depression. People didn't
No.
know. So might as well just focus on external politics.
Yeah.
And he continued to do that
Well, again,
by,
we were living
yeah,
in
go ahead.
a post-Confederation world, and and in that way, it not only makes him the successor to Laurier,
Yeah.
but it makes him the successor to MacDonald.
Yeah. He kind of takes the best of both in this case.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he takes the sort of bridge building, sunny ways approach of Laurier and immigration and all that, and then also the hardline Canada for Canada that MacDonald does, along with
Yeah.
the really
He
weird
does.
shit that both of them did.
Oh yeah. Talking to ghosts.
I wonder what he would have thought of like the Ghostbusters.
You're like, oh, they're
Because
onto something.
well, I mean, Dan Aykroyd is a Canadian who also talks to ghosts. So like, I can just imagine
There's
Dan
something.
Aykroyd sitting up in bed. William Lyon Mackenzie came to me in a dream.
It's just that's who he's talking to in his Ouija board. It's not his mom. It's William Mackenzie King.
Do I make movie about ghosts? Yes.
Yes.
Warn people of the danger.
Now I'm just imagining King as a ghost in Ghostbusters, and that's real hilarious. So basically, he would continue in his like foreign policy trade. In like 1923, he would sign a new fish treaty with the Americans, and he would specifically send one of his Quebec members, a man by the name of Lapointe, who would.
His point man.
Yeah, exactly. Very good.
The point man,
and
Lapointe.
And once again, it kind of sticks it to the British on two
Yeah.
fronts. Not only is he dealing with the Quebecois, right, like reconciling French English, but also Canada is dealing on their own with the Americans, right? Not just talking back to Britain, but doing their own thing, right? Their own fish treaties, right, which had rarely been done, right?
Fish treaties.
Yeah, and he would kind of keep going on that confidence with like the imperial conferences. He would make a name for himself as being someone who was very who was pushing for a less unified and centralized dominion, right? He did want his determining cause was like Canadian action through Canadian Parliament, and a lot of old men in white whiskers said unkind things about him as a result. So I guess that's what he was dealing with. It's just a bunch of cranky old British men. That's great. That's like I think what we should all aim for as politicians.
I mean, the man is showing a deft hand at foreign politics that like you rarely see these days.
He knows what buttons to push. I'll give him that. Yeah.
Well, it's because it's one of those things. Canadian politicians are almost known these days for rolling over for mommy and daddy, as it were. You know, like roll over and do with the Americans. So when you have somebody who has the conviction and like the strength to stand and say, give them a middle finger, tell them to go fuck themselves. You need us as much as we need you. It does a lot.
It sure does.
Like,
Yeah.
I can't tell you like the amount of like conservative friends that I had that can like said Justin Trudeau did well when he beat Trump at the handshake thing.
I mean, yeah, it's important, right?
Yeah.
For that's literally politics.
Yeah.
In this case, yeah.
Well, do you remember the handshake?
Yes, I remember the handshake.
Oh God.
So
King looked down from the heavens and he said, "That's it. That's it. Tell the orange to go fuck himself. Now punch him in the face." His ghost inhabited Justin Trudeau's body for a minute and just said, "No."
I like this idea that like every time a politician does something well in the foreseeable future, it's just Mackenzie King's ghost that haunts him for a brief second.
I want it to be the ghost of all the other politicians. Like when Trudeau legalized marijuana, I can just imagine his dad inhabited his body for a hot minute and it was like, fucking yay.
That would be something his dad would do. Okay. So
John Chrétien tried his damnedest not to get Trudeau to hand out all the money.
So we got to get this episode rolling. It's so long.
But this is why we are gonna have a 3-parter. This man is insane. I love him.
So because everything was going well, right? He's
so
obvious
great,
economic.
He hasn't fucked his sister yet.
Yeah, right. His obvious economic wisdom has raised the standard of living, and he's been able to even reduce taxes. The budget is balanced, which seems like a pipe dream, right? In today's world. So because of all of this, he's like, hey, it's been 4 years I'm in power, and things are going even better. There's two things I'm going to do. One, get all the liberals back that had gone to the Progressive Party. We'll bring all of these back to my party. Two, call an election. Because what better time to do it than when the good times roll, right?
Yeah,
and so
do it during a pandemic.
Exactly. But contrary to Trudeau, who did slightly worse during a pandemic, Mackenzie King's popularity soared. He absolutely crushed it because, of course, he did. But I'm just joking. He actually didn't.
He crashed and burned.
His total number of seats did fall, and the only way that he survived again was because of the progressives. He still had to hang on to them in this case because otherwise the Tories had won more votes. So that's not, for some reason he just didn't it didn't work out well for him. Mostly because the Tories were able to take English Canada, right, which tends to be a little bit more conservative. And so the liberalism and the indecisiveness that Mackenzie King took seemed to be a little bit too much for the conservatives, right? Yeah. Go ahead.
It's just funny to me.
It is funny.
Our government just we just can't function most days. But that said, I do prefer our system over a two-party system.
Yes, which is basically our two-party system anyway. But yeah, it's better. It's slightly better.
The Liberals still had to build a coalition with the NDP.
Oh yeah, for sure. Which are basically Liberals light at this point.
Jagmeet Singh is just Liberal light. Not even sorry, not Liberal light.
Go ahead. Say it.
I'm gonna get canceled.
So one of the main people that Mackenzie King kind of paired up with was a man by the name of J.S. Woodsworth, who was a church minister and a socialist. And
I wonder how much his wood is worth.
I hate you. So
you see me going there for the low fruit, baby. Woo!
So one of the reasons why Woodsworth was so keen to associate with King is because Woodsworth had been one of the people who had been imprisoned by the Conservatives during the Winnipeg strike. So there was no love lost between Woodsworth and Meehan, who was vehemently anti the Winnipeg strike, right? And anti-communist. And Woodsworth, being a socialist, was not super happy about that.
Everybody was anti-communist in those days,
except Woodsworth,
except the Russians.
Exactly. And so in these first few months of his re-election in 1925, his budget speech would hint at what would become the first old age pensions. And it didn't go anywhere. The Tories controlled the Senate, and so they slapped down that bill very quickly. But you start to see incremental changes that he's hinting at, right, in Canada. And he's trying to push things forward slowly but surely. And old age pension obviously is something that we have now. But this new term, right, wouldn't last very long because, as you mentioned, prohibition is a thing.
Yay!
And where is it a thing?
We're going to ban the alcohol. And because of that, we're going to create the tipping system, and then waiters and waitresses will never have a living wage ever again.
Yay! Love it.
The market's at work.
So the thing is, there's prohibition in the States, but in Canada, it doesn't really last long, right? So what do a lot of Canadians...
a bunch of drunk motherfuckers.
because we know that that's
to take
bullshit.
The wine from the Quebecois.
That would cause another run, I think.
Are you kidding me? If I ever try to tell my mom she should drink another glass of wine, I'm gonna get smacked across the head. Yeah,
and now imagine if the SAQ was banned. Oh, but so Canada, or at least non-officially, Canada makes a name for itself as someone that has illegal alcohol. Isn't that fun, right? Can't a lot of bootleggers make a lot of money off selling moonshine to Americans, right? Isn't that great? But officially, the Canadian government, of course, does not endorse that. Unfortunately, some of the customs officers in Mackenzie King's government didn't exactly get the memo. um, so in 1926, the conservative government was like, hey, what are you doing here? There seems to be some illegal shenanigans going on with the customs here, and people seem to be making money hand over fist here. What's happening? And so,
meanwhile, Canadians hopped up on cocaine and liquor. Were like, nah, don't worry about it, man. It's all good.
So basically,
King is there's like it's foreign policy, baby. Foreign policy and the free markets at work. Woo!
Yeah. I mean, pretty much.
They just smoked another line of cocaine.
Was cocaine still legal by then? Probably.
I don't know. I feel like it was probably still in the cough syrup.
Oh, for sure. I feel like it was still certainly in the Coca-Cola. I don't know when they removed it, but
if it wasn't cocaine, they were taking opioid.
Oh yeah, someone was doing drugs somewhere. So anyway, Mackenzie King's like, okay, fine, this is weird. We'll take care of it. And he went to the governor general and he's like, hey, can I call another election? And the governor general, who never really liked King, was like, no, I'm gonna give Arthur Meighen a chance to govern, and that's where our last episode came in, right? The brief moment in 1926. Where Meighen was in power is because of this. Because a customs officer.
Mathematician.
Yeah, exactly. Is because a customs officer somewhere was like, yeah, I'll allow alcohol to pass through. I don't give a shit. Right? That's basically why. And so that leads to basically an end to Mackenzie's first term. The second term, which we'll kind of go through very quickly because it doesn't last very long. Basically, not long after Meighen takes over the government, Mackenzie King starts basically alleging that it was because of constitutional interference that the scandal was caused, basically saying that it was everyone else's fault except his, and he wins the election again in 1926. He comes back in, people didn't care about the scandal, and so they just reelected him, which I think is fair. It's such a nothing scandal that why not?
Well, the scandal is basically, you were making money for the government by selling booze.
Yeah, pretty much. Like, oh no.
Oh no. Well, you could almost spin it as a win of like, I set up a trade. The Americans are dependent on me for their alcohol. That's just a positive.
Yeah, and it's like people were individually making money off of it, so everyone was like, if I kind of take the moral high ground on this one, I'm going to put myself in hot water, so I'm just not going to say anything.
Yeah, the governor general wasn't happy.
Yeah, but fuck the governor general. He's a nonce. Who gives a shit? But what's kind of interesting is that in this second term, he didn't really make any like memorable speeches about Canadian unity or free trade or anything like that. All he had to do was keep reminding people that Arthur Meighen was an Anglophile, which is what most of his speeches were centered around.
This asshole, this total. Let me tell you, Arthur Meighen is the biggest Anglophile in the history of Anglophiles. There's never been a bigger Anglophile in all of Anglophilism. Me, I'm not an Anglophile. I'm like you guys. I'm one of you. I'm one of you, but better. But I'm still one of you. He's an Anglophile. That's all he is.
It's like you were reading off of the transcript of the speech right there. Beautiful.
Yeah. Who knew Donald Trump got his speeches from Mackenzie King?
Yeah, exactly. I really am not. A cultural history of Canada does not endorse. So he basically trusted his voters on this one, and it worked. Once he was in power again, this time he tried to reintroduce the old age pension that he had tried in his first term, and it actually passed this time because the Senate was more liberal. And again, this is kind of a small step towards what we now know as the welfare state, right? Which is kind of building up in the 1920s and 30s and would really kick off after World War II. So little things like the old age pension are very much emblematic of, King's influence on literally the way that politics are done today, right? And what the government is seen as meant to be doing. Um, it's obviously not at all the same old age pension as what we're used to today. Like it's only if people needed it, and it's for people over 70, and it was like $20 a month, which is still like it's something. But most people didn't live to 70 at the time. And yeah, it wasn't like as much of a burden on the budget as perhaps some people might see it today, right? Because
Even though like
obviously
the old age pension isn't giving it's not giving old people a lot of money.
no, it's like people say it's a burden, but it's really not. It's a drop in the bucket.
It really is.
Yeah. So there was even talk, because obviously the economic boom kept booming, right? Thanks to Mackenzie King, obviously.
The boom keeps booming, baby.
It's never going to stop, right? Never going to stop. Still going. 1926, let's go, baby. Peaks. Just peaks on peaks on peaks. And because it's peaking
That means
so
lower
much,
and lower taxes.
hell yeah. Because again, we forget this, but the income tax was supposed to be temporary for the war. And so now that everything is going swimmingly, why require the income tax? You don't need it. Everything's great. So
and then
income
everything
taxes
wasn't.
are gone. And then the good times stopped. But before that, he went to Italy on a little trip.
This is giving Big Trudeau posting pictures of Castro vibes. Again, Justin Trudeau posting that picture. Mackenzie King possessed his fucking body and went, no, post the picture.
So the only reason I bring up his trip to Italy is because it does kind of foreshadow like some of Mackenzie King's later like less favorable positions during World War II. So this motherfucker goes to Italy.
It was almost the Ottawa, Berlin, Rome, Tokyo alliance axis.
Almost. And then he reconsidered strongly. So this motherfucker goes to Italy, right? And who's in power in the
to El Duce?
Mussolini himself. And he's like, you know what? Pretty swell guy.
Sorry, I can't help myself. It's so stupid. I love it. Well, it's the same way that like Time magazine voted Hitler to be Man of the Year because of how he fixed Germany, you know? It's just I can't fault him so much because there was just like that front that we didn't know about the way like, but it's still just so funny in hindsight.
Yeah, because again, people forget, but Mussolini, right, as like an instigator of fascism, in the modern sense, like he very much started off as someone who was left leaning. I mean, he was a socialist at first, and then shifted very radically to the other side because of what he saw as the inefficiencies, right, and what he saw as like the ineffectiveness, I should say, of the left-wing politics, which led to fascism. And so a lot of his rhetoric, right, still contained a lot of that populist element that you see in more left-leaning discourses, right? Doing things for the people, allowing, the common man to be lifted up, right? And all of that permeates a lot of Mussolini's speeches. So I think you're absolutely right in saying, like, if you're just faced with that without knowing what's going on, right, democratically or economically and all of that, it's going to look good. So yeah, it's not great in hindsight. He specifically said he was encouraged by Italy's progress, and he said the people, not the classes, have come into their own truly, and allowing Mussolini to power. So, great thing. We'll see. We'll check back into Mussolini in 1944 and see how he's doing. I think the people will still be loving him. So he comes back from Italy, and the good times keep going for a little bit. And then in October, something happens. on Wall Street, you start to see a bunch of simple investors begin to suspect that capitalism might not work for everyone, and people are starting to see more and more portly men in striped pants dropping from windows. so, so things are
Then
not
the rich
going
were
well.
eaten.
So basically, this marks the end of Mackenzie King's kind of second term. It coincides pretty much with the crash, as things just go pretty much overnight from great to terrible, right? Literally, in this case, in the span of hours. Suddenly, people were less interested in Mackenzie King, and he really didn't help himself in this case, because at least the Tories in Parliament in the first year, right, of the recession were like, hey, maybe we should help some of the farmers out west and some of the people who are like literally facing bread lines and stuff like that. And Mackenzie King was like, no, not because he didn't like the people, but because it was a conservative suggestion and he refused to give in to anything that the conservatives wanted. So that's suddenly he decided to grow a pair and decided to not be a middle of the fence asshole about everything. And he decided to stake a claim about that just because it was a conservative idea. And he got burned because of it. So people did not vote him in for 1930 and instead voted in Bennett, R.B. Bennett, who, as we'll see in a later episode, didn't do much better. So good for Bennett.
Good for Bennett.
Yeah, I don't know. We just kind of powered through this last little bit of his.
Well, I think we realized we need to keep freaking going.
Like, yeah, I don't know. Like, it's very hard to say much except he was very ineffective at first because I think a lot of people didn't realize what was going on or like how to respond to such a devastating crash. Like, how do you react
what the fuck do you do when the entire economy?
Yeah, it literally goes from 150% to zero.
We still don't know how the economy works. Imagine back in the day. People have to really realize. Remember, capitalism is not like an old institution. It's been around for like 200 years, maybe.
Yeah, well, obviously there's historical debate on that, but yeah, like as a firm thing, yeah, let's say 200.
Yeah, but like obviously there was mercantilism and all that before it for sure.
Sure. Yeah. But that's the thing, like that's kind of what's interesting though, is that again, kind of indicating where politics is going. What you start to see with King and Bennett and others is this world in which we try to micromanage elements of the economy, right? It's like, oh, there's inflation, so let's do this. And now there's a lot of there's too many jobs, right? And so we need to fill in those gaps and all of that. And so we're micromanaging little pieces of the economy
and not much bigger pie.
Right, exactly, and not like the entire system, right? And you start to see the inklings of that here, right? Which makes for very managerial-like politics rather than leadership politics, right? Which I think is something that you could validly critique, no matter 100%. Like what side you're on of the political
no matter spectrum. Where you end up on the aisle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that this ineffectiveness towards the Depression does start to show those cracks, right, that are forming. But yeah, I don't know. What do you feel about Mackenzie King so far, like in his first years?
I like him. I mean, I don't know. As a force of personality, he's great. Obviously, it's not great they didn't really have any internal positions.
Yeah.
But he's probably has some of the best handling on foreign policy that we've seen in a while.
Sure. Yep. That sounds about right.
I mean, again, we were not really seeing what made him the juggernaut that he is. This is just signs of what he will become, leading into,
Yeah.
I love how we're gonna have to have a whole episode of ranking Bennett between our Mackenzie King episodes, though.
Like again, just now, I would put him like middle of the road. He's like,
I would put him at the same level we put Alexander. What's his name?
Mackenzie. The other Mackenzie.
The two Mackenzie. Yeah, I'd put them around the same of like that 4th, 5th spot.
Okay, yeah, that sounds about right. I agree.
Is that where we? Yeah, like we have them. We have Alexander Mackenzie in that 3rd place spot, I think. So I think he's around there, that 3rd and 4th spot.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
But he's not at the heights of Laurier or McDonald just yet.
No.
But I'm pretty sure he's gonna get there.
Yeah, so far he's not impressing. Like, that's what I'll say.
That don't impress me much.
He's just kind of going through. What I'm getting the sense of is just him going through the motions rather than actually leading.
Like, well, it almost feels like he's waiting for the big event.
Yeah.
It feels like he's waiting for the big thing to happen,
Yeah. And he will get that big thing.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also, at the time, the 1920s was so successful. Like, there was a lot of world leaders that weren't really doing anything because they were just like, everything's working on its own. I don't need to do anything. I can just sit here, hands off.
And especially when you'd just gone through World War I, you just kind of want to rest. You're like, okay,
yeah,
I've just spent 4.5 years.
The same thing was in America. Like, who was the president that came after Wilson? Do you even know?
Oh shit. Which is the one that made the New Deal? Isn't it him?
That's FDR.
Yeah, though that's later, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's like after the Great Depression starts. It's Warren G. Harding.
I've heard the name, but I couldn't tell you a single thing that he did.
Yeah, and then he died 2 years into office.
Like a noob.
Yeah, and then
Coolidge.
Then Calvin Coolidge.
Yeah, but again, names that I've heard but couldn't tell you a single thing about their policy.
Yeah. Anyway, because again, what are you supposed to do when the economy is going along that well?
Yeah, I feel like if King's tenure had only been what we talked about today, he would have been forgotten.
Yeah, but it's not.
No.
He's going to be back in 1935, and we're going to see, the king is really going to get into motion now.
Da, 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 da. Just coming in and
stomping Bennett.
I wish I knew wrestling terms just to imitate what he. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Mac, take us away.
Well, folks, thanks for listening. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can reach out on our Facebook page or by email. You can support the show through PayPal as a just paying what you feel the show is worth kind of situation. Or, sign up for the Patreon. You can find perks like extra and ad-free episodes there too. We talk about beavers and Paw Patrol. But as always, this is going to be optional. We're here for you guys, We're here to create just a fun, free little show. If you want, you can just leave us a little review on iTunes. It's really, really appreciated. Share it around with some friends, maybe. It always just helps to give the show a little boost, just a little boosty boost. But thanks. We'll see you next time on A Cultural History of Canada.
Before we go, how do you feel about the 100th episode? Yay or nay?
I love the 100th episode. This is hilarious. This is such what a perfect way to have a 100th episode.
Just
and I love how there was no textual analysis except for one short poem. What a perfect thing to perfectly representative of our non sequitur tangentialness.
Look, it is cultural. Politics is a cultural
thing. We didn't even talk about the comics, the political cartoons that you found.
I just kind of got on a tangent and it doesn't matter. We got there anyway. Next week we're actually going to talk about a novel. That'll be fun. Yay! All right, bye everyone.
Cheers.